Good Monday morning. Has anybody ever told you they couldn't believe in God because it was just too weird? A God that's everywhere, he's in time, out of time, he's light, these are just fairy stories, they would say. What if I were to tell you that we live in a fairy story in one way? That everything about us is weirder than you could possibly imagine. Yes, welcome to the world of quantum physics, but do not change your channel. This will not be painful. In fact, I think you're going to find it fun, if weird. And that's the thing you need to know. When you think of quantum mechanics or somebody says quantum physics, you think, well, half of that seems made up. It's incredibly weird. It's way too complicated. How could anybody even understand that? I just don't know where I buy into this. You are absolutely correct. And yet the fact is, quantum physics is a real thing. You see, the universe is really weird. Back in 1900, Max Planck discovered that the universe's energy is found not in this realm of endless possibilities, but in small packets, these little packets called quanta. Now remember, all the energy and all the matter that ever was, ever will be, was there when God created it. Or, if you're an atheist, when once upon a time there was nothing and then it blew up. From that time forward until the end of whatever time it is, and entropy collapses everything back down, then you can't make any more energy. You can't make any more matter. You can move energy and matter back and forth, but that takes quite a lot of energy. So this little packet of energy, called a quanta. That's where they get the name for quantum physics or quantum mechanics. And it is incredibly weird, but it's also beautiful. This is one thing that you really need to grasp if you want to understand how weird the universe is and how complex God is. While we're doing this, I want you to remember Colossians 1. Colossians 1 has Jesus as the center of all things, who made all things, and all things were made for him, and in him all things, here's the key, hold together. Now, what an odd phrase, except it isn't. I'm sitting on a chair. That chair is made up of atoms. We're all together so far, are we not? I would certainly hope so. We all understand what a chair is, and we've heard about atoms, and atoms, we were told, were the smallest things in the universe, and now not even close. But let's just go with atoms. Now, I'm going to get up here in a little bit and do a meeting, and when I come back, I'm going to sit in this chair. Except the atoms most likely won't be the same atoms. See, the atoms are always moving, regrouping. Atoms have no mind, no thought process, no personality, no brain. And yet they form, and then they move, and they form, and they move. We used to think that when you made a chair and you put it there, that chair would always be there. And functionally, for us who live in a world which is basically Newtonian physics, that sure looks like it, and I will sit upon it with no hesitation at all. But the atoms have moved. Other atoms are there now. It's one of the many reasons why racism is such a stupid thing. And that the atoms which make up me, a white guy, are also making up everybody else. And in fact, the atoms that made me up a few months ago are almost certainly not the atoms that are making me up now. It is absolutely like the end of the Matrix with all the green dots, just floating down and cascading. We know that now because we've gone into the world of the impossibly small. Well, it is small, but we always thought it was impossible to go smaller until we did. Every little packet, quanta, has the potential to be here, there, or anywhere. And when we observe it, it changes. In fact, it changes sometimes direction, sometimes it changes velocity, sometimes it changes spin, but merely looking at it changes it. I know it gets really woo-woo here, but and by the way, there's a lot of rubbish about how you can use your mind and actuate things from the universe. The universe is not that impressed by you. And you're not going to be able to look at water and impress it with memories. You're going to need to move on past this. The world is impossibly strange, and our brains aren't going to get a handle on how to control this. In fact, if we trapped an electron in a box and we tried to constrict its space until we could pinpoint both its velocity and its direction, it would just become we know this because we've tried, it gets far more excited, moves faster and more erratically, where it is impossible. You can know how fast it's going, or you can know where it is, but you can't know both. Confused yet? That's fine. It's kind of the point. The universe is amazing, and it looks to our minds like utter chaos and utter randomness. And yet, I can sit on the chair, even though the atoms have moved, and feel very confident that I'm sitting on a chair and will not go through it, or that the atoms have formed into an aardvark. I am very confident there. I know that whenever I was conceived, it was just a sperm and an egg. Now, all the DNA that was needed for me was there. But all the atoms, those needed to coalesce from elsewhere. And guess what? All the atoms that are making me up right now, making you up, have been in existence since the beginning of time. And they've been doing other things. They might have been trees. They might have been rivers. They might have been buildings. They might have been mules. But whatever they weren't that forever, because they keep moving. And in one day, the atoms that are working to make me alive, and by the way, they don't know they're doing that. They have no brain, no plan, nothing. All of those atoms will just stop and go do something else. Isn't that cool? So how big is God again? Again, you don't believe in God because he's too big and too weird and kind of a fairy story. Do you realize what you're living in, one? You're living in the strangest of things. Einstein at first really fought against this. His theory of relativity, as weird as that was, both the special and the general, there are two theories of relativity that he came up with. The specific theory of relativity was a simpler one. The general relativity was a far more complex one. I know that doesn't sound right, but that's Einstein. Well, he really fought against quantum physics and saying it's just too weird. And he famously said, God does not play dice with the universe. Well, Niels Bohr, one of the great early quantum physicists, looked at him and said, don't tell God what to do. I thought that was a pretty good riposte to Einstein. Quantum mechanics occupies an interface where physics and metaphysics meet. There are proven absolute limits to human knowledge. Our ability to measure, our ability to predict the future, our ability to know what is hidden from us on the other side of the planet, the whole idea of psychic ability, no. I know J.B. Rhine's experiments back in North Carolina, and I've also read the last 50 years of literature that does not duplicate any of it. It doesn't work. Max Planck, again, one of the originators of quantum mechanics, was not spiritually shaken by what he was finding. In fact, he said this was science and religion. Let me get a quote. Wage a tireless battle against skepticism and dogmatism, against unbelief and superstition, with the goal of going toward God. It's amazing that until the last, I'd say 60 years, scientists led the way in faith. Now, there were exceptions in certain fields that didn't, but they did. And it wasn't until later in the university selection process, selecting who gets to get into here and who gets to get into there, and then afterwards, who gets to have a grant and who gets to be a professor, that they weed out the believers in the West. We brought this up in an earlier Monday morning, that in the East, you're far more likely to believe in God if you're a scientist, because they don't have these systems in place to weed you out. But that said, have you heard of string theory? You want to talk about how weird believing in God is? Well, let's go find the smallest thing you can find. Neutron, proton, quark, all those are huge. We can go smaller. We go smaller, 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 and finally we arrive at what looks like a point. Infinitesimally small point. We zoom in and we zoom in and we zoom in, and what do we see? We don't see a point. We see a little wiggling string. According to string theory, the whole universe is made up of these vibrating strings. Problem is, we can't grasp the weirdness of a universe made up with the vibrating strings. You know why? They require 9 dimensions. I've heard it argued, and actually pretty good arguments, 11 dimensions. Dimensions like time is a 4th dimension that we live in. But we talk about, height and depth and width. We have that 3D. I can remember when 3D TVs were coming out. What was that, 15, 20 years ago? And people were going, this is the future. And I was going, no, too many problems. One, it looks like a puppet show. And 2, we live in a 3D world. If I want 3D, I walk outside. And again, you can go to 3D movies, but it's not the same. But what if we had 9 dimensions? Can you imagine it? No, you can't. We only get there through advanced mathematics. You can't get there by sitting and thinking about it. You have to actually do the hard math. It is there's a great novel called Flatland, which is about a world that exists in 2 dimensions, and suddenly a 3-dimensional being approaches. It is strange, but it is not inaccessible. I think you would enjoy it. Although it might have some aspirin nearby, but you'll get through it. It'll work, all right? God lives in so many dimensions that trying to say, where is God? I want to understand God. I think God, your God's a fairy tale because he can just do anything and be anywhere. Yeah, have you heard about strings? Have you heard about quanta? Have you heard about for lack of a better word, non-technical word, migration, continual migration of all atoms, which means those vibrating strings constantly retuning and moving about the place. In fact, they are what creates place. The challenge for us is to understand what all this teaches us about God. And for one thing, it convinces me that God is brilliant. He's a super intellect. He is living a multi-dimensional being. And the idea that this vast, amazing amount of order, knowledge, thought, process has personality and loves us. That if you're wearing socks, they should be blown off about now. Quantum uncertainty is what we call it, because you can never pin down anything in the universe. Like that electron, the closer you get to it, the faster and more erratic it'll get. We can take it, in fact, things are paired with spins. I'm just going to do this briefly. You can look this up on your own. Things are paired with spins. When one of them goes this way, the other turns the other way. For lack of a better term, clockwise and counterclockwise. But they can actually be on separate sides of the planet. And if you look at one, it'll change direction, and so will the one on the other side of the planet. These strings connect. Colossians 1, in him all things hold together. He is also, John chapter 1, he is light. And light is a central truth of the universe. It is a defining entity in the universe, and God is light. He manipulates time and space as it suits him. He is unfathomable, just as he said he was. And he cares. And he loves you. Well, none of these quanta are able to be pinned down, and quantum uncertainty is the reality of the very big and the very small. And we live in that Newtonian middle. But while that uncertainty is below us and above us and around us and through us and in us, God is certain because he has decided to love us. And that makes all the difference. This is why I believe that the cherubim, seraphim, and others around God in heaven are spinning around crying out, holy, holy, holy. I don't think it's to feed God's ego that he needs sycophants to walk around going, oh, you're just wonderful. Aren't you just the greatest? No. I believe that once we begin to understand and see God for who he is, we will never get over it. It's the difference between, I can go to Switzerland. Switzerland's one of the most beautiful places on earth. And your jaw just drops. First time, yes. Second time, 20th time. If I were to go 1,000 times, I would end up being like a lot of the Swiss that I've talked to who say, after a while, you don't even notice. God is greater, so much greater. We'll never get over how amazing it is that he's our Father and he loves us. And he loves you. Don't let the devil tell you otherwise. He loves you. God bless. And say a prayer of praise to him. And maybe a prayer of thanks that we live in the Newtonian middle, because it's a lot more comfortable than the reality above and below us.